Sorry, I was not here last week. I was out with the flu, like we were talking about, and it was nasty. So thanks for giving me a break. Appreciate it. And so I wanted to recap a little bit from the week, some 2 weeks ago. So we talked about how to date, principles for dating. Talked a little bit about dating with clarity and dating prayerfully, different things like that. Talking about a lot of why we see a lot of confusion and a lot of anxiety in this particular realm is because there's just a ton of ambiguity, right? There's a ton of just people. There's blurred lines. There's a lot of misunderstanding. There's a lack of leadership. So all of that leads to a lot of confusion. So did anybody have questions about previous weeks, anything like that? No? Okay, we'll get rolling. So this week we are going to talk about, we're going to do like a dating case study, okay? So we're going to look at, from Scripture, we're going to look at an example of what does this look like, a case study, maybe something we could base off, we could use in our own lives. So as I was preparing this, I thought about a lot. So as a kid, so I am one. Josh, you have a big crew, right? You have a big family. How many do you have? 3 siblings. Okay. So I'm one of 7 siblings. So there are 4 girls and 3 boys. So I have an older brother. Then there were 4 straight girls, and then there were 2 more boys. So I'm one of 7 siblings, and so the ladies outnumbered the guys. And so a reality that we had to adjust to pretty quick in the McCammon household was that the girls had sway over the remote. Right? So any sort of TV watching scenario, girls won out. Okay, so that means we watched a ton of chick flicks. So if you're familiar, chick flicks, or I think rom-coms, chick flicks. That should be familiar terminology. So they were lucky because honestly, I just wanted to watch TV, and so I didn't really care what we watched. And so we watched a ton of like romantic comedies and all these romance TV shows and I don't know. So looking back now, so it's funny. So when Leah and I got married, I would be like, "Oh, have you seen like You Got Mail? It's great." And she was like, "No, I haven't seen that one." And I was like, "Oh, how about Return to Me?" Or like all these, Affair to Remember, all this stuff. And so I actually had more rom-com knowledge than my wife, which was kind of embarrassing to be truthful to you. So, so I was thinking about this, and so I thought, like, well, why? Like, why is it that like rom-coms, whatever, chick flicks, whatever you want to call them, why are they so popular? Like, why is like, this is a genre that's like been around forever. As long as there's been movies, there's been like romantic comedies, right? Why do you think that is? Huh? People want that.
Out of their relationship.
Right. Yeah, it's like, that sounds pretty great. What were you saying? Yeah. So it's kind of, I would even go one step further, and it's almost like people want that, but people realize that not many people have that, right? So that's kind of the disconnect, right? Because there's this understanding of like, man, that sounds really great, but I don't have that, and I don't think a lot of people have that. And I think that that kind of goes back to this root of this issue. Is the problem of this is that it's not really a realistic thing. You look at like your typical romantic comedy, you're like, this is not likely to happen, right? So the ultimately this boils down to so principles. We talked a lot in this class about principles, some guidelines, framework, things like that. So these kind of help. They shape our thinking, but pictures can capture our imagination. Does that make sense? So that's why we like chick flicks. That's why we like rom-coms, because it's like it kind of captures our imagination. So we can give me facts all day, but it can sometimes, if you don't have like a picture, it can kind of be like, this is not resonating with me, So like our pastor is like a brilliant at like he's explaining something and he gives you a picture, right? So in order for us to, so I wanted to look at a picture from Scripture of what this looks like. Okay, so it gives us an example of like, okay, so we know if you go to the rom-com scene, it's not really realistic. It's not really, you can't really look at this and be like, I'm going to base my relationship off of this, off You Got Mail, you know? It's like, this is probably not going to work for you, okay? So I'm going to look at Genesis 24. So we're going to be kind of exploring Genesis 24. It is, so believe it or not, Genesis 24 is the longest chapter in Genesis. So it gets more ink than the story of creation and the fall and all of these things. It's a long chapter, and so it's drawing our attention. There's this really significant account of this relationship that occurs. So we're going to look at that. So we're not going to read it in its entirety, but we are going to kind of just see it maybe from like a 30,000-foot view. Okay, so. We're going to look at, and if you have your Bibles and you want to kind of follow along, feel free to do that. And then as well, if you want to take any notes, there's some additional note material in the back. So in Genesis 24, so we see Abraham, the patriarch Abraham, so he seeks out his oldest and most trusted servant, okay? And he gives him a special mission, okay? And he says, I want you to go back to my country, the land where I'm from, and I want you, the land where my family is, and I want you to find a wife for my son. Okay? So why does he want him to do that? Why go back? Why go back? And so an important thing to understand is that so Abraham lived, so God had called out Abraham. God had called him out, and Abraham had moved away. He'd gone into a land that God was going to show him. He had moved in faith, and he knew that where he was in Canaan, he knew these people here do not know Yahweh. They do not know the one true God. And so he says, I want you to go back to my family, and I want you to find a wife for my son. Okay, so he knew people in Canaan, they had multiple gods, and the worship of these gods typically revolved around one, like violence. You know, so in some of these cultures, the child sacrifice was really common. And then also a huge part, you see this in a lot of the Old Testament, is a lot of these pagan worship revolved around sensual or sexual kind of activity. So Abraham is saying, I do not want my son, so the person who's going to carry on this promise, I don't want my son to get a wife from these people, okay? So, he understood that these people were running in an opposite direction of where he was going. Does that make sense? So they were going in the opposite direction, and he said, I've got to find a wife for my son who's going to believe in the one true God. Okay, so if you look at this, in his search, he doesn't have a laundry list of characteristics. He's got one criteria, okay? So his one criteria is that she has got to be a believer in the one true God, okay? So if you look a little bit further down, the servant, so in the story, the servant responds doubtfully. So he says, man, okay, what if I find somebody? Say I do, you're sending me on sort of this wild goose chase. So if I find someone, what is going to happen if she doesn't want to come back with me? Right? So he's going to the land of Abraham's family, and he's saying, what's going to happen if say I do find somebody, and what if she's like, I'm not coming back with you, right? So notice Abraham's response here. So he doesn't say, well, man, just do your best. If it doesn't work out, we'll find someone a little closer, you know, something that's going to be a little bit more convenient for us. Okay, he does not say that. He says, no. So he says, if she won't come, you are free from this oath, but do not let my son go back there. So it's important that we realize, so Abraham, so he had left, God had called him out, he had left all the comforts of home, and he, by faith, was resting in the promise that God was going to make of him a great nation. And so he was not going to go backwards, okay? He did not want to move backwards. So this is the kind of relationship and marriage you want. You do not want someone who is going to move backwards. You want to move forward. So Abraham knew, I got to find a wife for my son who will join us in this journey of faith, who will move forward with us, and we're not taking steps backward here, okay? If a person, so in your walk and as you examine your personal relationships, as you look at these things, if a person, especially in the context of a romantic relationship, if a person does not walk by faith, then you need to part ways, right? So that's a critical thing for us to remember, that if Abraham was looking at this scenario and he was saying, this is absolutely essential. We're not going to go backwards. We need to have someone who believes in the one true God and someone who walks by faith. And so if that doesn't happen, then I'd rather not have a wife for my son, okay? So a takeaway for us here is that Abraham is walking by faith, and he's trusting that the God who called him out, he can provide a mate for his son, okay? So that's important for us. That's an important takeaway for us. So if God can save you, you can trust him to provide a mate for you, a spouse for you, okay? Does that make sense? So Ben, in this book, Ben Stewart, he has a great quote. He says, so many of us trust God with a lot of stuff, but when it comes to marriage, we are scared to death he's going to do something terrible to us. Either we will never meet someone, or if we trust God to provide a husband or wife, we will have to wait forever, and then the guy or girl will be weird or not at all what we want. So we take it into our own hands, which usually involves trying to dress a certain way or act a certain way or say certain things in order to catch, land, or bag a spouse. I don't know about you, but I don't like those terms. Like, I bagged myself a nice lady. You know, it's like, no, we don't. That's a perversion. It's a twisted understanding of what this is. Okay, so I love that this imagery of like we feel like we can trust God. We're saying, man, I want to trust God with my life. You know, I want to follow him. I want to give everything to him. But when it comes to a relationship with someone, I need to make the call, right? So there seems to be a huge disconnect. And as a result, so trusting the Lord with the side effects of joy, peace, and a whole lot more of things, they go just flying right out the window, okay? So listen to this. Don't be a believer who doesn't believe God will care for you. Don't be a believer who doesn't believe God will care for you. If you have trusted God with your eternal destiny, you can trust him with your love life, okay? If you've trusted God with your eternal destiny, you can trust him with your love life. I love the example that Herschel gives of when a house guest, a house guest in his home, and he says, just make yourself at home, and he comes home, and the guest is rooting through his filing cabinets. He's like, well, I'm looking at your tax returns, right? And that's, of course, he's using it as an illustration. It's like, so that is so true of us, right? We're saying, Lord, I want to give you my life, but not this part. This part, this is for me. This is not for you. This is for me, right? So this needs to be, we need to think of this holistically. We're thinking, no, God, I'm giving you this. I'm trusting you. I'm trusting you with, if you can save my soul, then you can provide me someone to, you can provide or not provide someone who I can walk along with. Okay? So in verse 8 of Genesis 24, we look at this, and it says, Abraham's response from this doubtful servant. He says, but if the woman is not willing to follow you, then you will be free from the oath of mine. Only you must not take my son back there. So Abraham is willing to let it all go, right? So if seeking marriage and living for God are at odds, okay? If there's a crossroads where seeking marriage and living for God are at odds, then he chooses God, right? So translation, I would rather be single than marry second best. I would rather be single than marry second best. I would rather cope with what can be loneliness, what can be anxiety of, what if this person, what if this doesn't happen for me? What Abraham is showing us here in Genesis is he's saying, I would rather this not happen than this happen in a bad way. Okay, so the servant begins his journey, and he goes back to the homeland of Abraham, and we read how to some strategies. And so he's figuring out, how do I fulfill this oath? How do I keep this promise that I've made to Abraham? And so his story it's unfolding, and we see some principles for how to do this, so we can and even can apply to our own lives. Okay, so the first thing that he does, and the first thing that we should do, is, number one, you got to go to the right place. Okay? So in verse 10, it says, "Then the servant took 10 of his master's camels and departed, taking all sorts of choice gifts from his master. And he arose and went to Mesopotamia, to the city of Nahor." Okay? So the servant goes to the city of Nahor. So this is not the name of a city, but it is the city where Abraham's brother lives. Okay? So why is this significant? So it's like, what does that have to do with anything? Okay, so this servant realizes that if he wants to find the right person, he's got to go to the right place. Okay, does that make sense? If he wants to find the right person, he has to go to the right place. He has to go to the city where Abraham's family lives. So he's saying, so I've been called to find a wife for my master's son. So he's not saying like, well, pick a random spot. He's like, okay, well, I got to go to the right place here, okay? So though it seems like it's kind of an obvious point, it's amazing how many believers in Jesus do not follow this simple strategy, okay? So Ben talks about speaking to a group of singles in Dallas, Texas, and he says he was stunned by how many of these young believers were attending church for their spiritual growth, actively involved, but yet they were solely relying on like the bar scene or dating apps for to meet someone in a romantic way, right? So this should kind of shock us here. So it's like, well, yeah, I trust. Once again, we see this again. I trust God with my life. I want to grow spiritually. I want to know God, but I kind of want to take this romantic relationship thing into my own hands here. I can't trust him with that. That's got to be my decision. Okay, so it's not impossible, right, to meet someone in like we talked about. Like there's lots of dating websites. That's not a bad thing, right? But it's not impossible to meet a good person in these places. However, it is likely that you've made your search a lot harder by introducing into the mix a lot of people who are not going to be a good fit. Does that make sense? So really all you're doing, so you're when you are looking everywhere, you're adding a lot of options into the mix that they're not going to be good options. More opportunity for you to be distracted, more opportunity for you to, it's going to be an opportunity to sin, right? And it's going to be an opportunity for you to say like, hey, I kind of like this person. They say they're a Christian-ish sort of, so like I'm going to go for it, right? So it's possible you can find a solid believer on a dating website. You can find that, but you're far more likely to find, if you're looking for someone, and I think we're in here because it's like, man, we want to be committed to doing this. If you want to find someone who's a growing believer, a person of integrity, you need to be involved in Christ exalting ministry. You need to be involved in the life of the church. You need to be involved in Christ exalting churches and ministries. And then you got to go to the right place. If you want to find the right person, you need to go to the right place, right? So many times it's like, well, yeah, I'm and this person is just not good. It's like, well, where'd you go to find him? Does that make sense? Okay, so he uses this as an illustration. So if you want to find a Kentuckian, right? You could probably find one in Ohio or Tennessee or Virginia or whatever, but the best place to start would probably be Kentucky, right? Does that make sense? Okay, so many times, I'm hear me say this. This is not this is bad and this is good. I'm saying that what is wise? What's wise? Okay. So if you want to find the right person, you need to go to the right place. Okay. Next thing he does, he goes at the right time. Okay, so he goes at the right place. And then number 2, he goes at the right time. Okay, it says, and he made the camels kneel down outside the city by the well of water at the time of evening, the time when women go out to draw water. Okay, so this is something that culturally, he knew this is going to be the right time for this. If I'm going to meet someone, I need to go at the right time, because this is the time culture. This was all of the women would come to the well, and they would water livestock, gather water for the evening, things like that. Okay, so notice here. So this isn't just, he's not just looking for the first pretty face he sees. Okay, so he wants to see someone who is actively serving. He wants to see someone he wants to find someone who is industrious, right? So he goes to at the right time. He's like, so if I'm going to try to find this person, I'm going to go where, a person who's caring for their family, a person who is fulfilling their responsibilities. I'm going to go because he knows they're going to be at this well, so he goes there. Okay, right? So you don't want to just see people in a social context. Does that make sense? You don't want to, I mean, it's not wrong to interact socially, but you don't want to see people in just a social context. You want to see them actively serving people in their churches and their communities, okay? That is such a danger for us, because it's very easy to look good in just a social setting. We can all kind of put on a face. We can all say the right things, look the right way, do all these things, right? And it's very easy for us to kind of wear this mask, right? In kind of a larger social setting, right? It's harder to fake. It's harder to fake when there's like, no, I'm actively involved in this thing, and I'm working to a certain end. So we have to look at, so why is this valuable? So if we look at Proverbs 31, right? So hopefully you are familiar with this. So the author talks about in Proverbs 31, the woman of great worth is not a passive person. Okay? She feeds and clothes her family. She conducts wise business transactions, and she deals successfully in like real estate deals, and she invests and she serves among the needy. Okay? She gets stuff done. And what she accomplishes improves the lives of everyone around her. Right? So kind of let's look at this in two ways, okay? Why it's important to go at the right time. So first, you want to see someone because you want to see someone actively serving and working, because you want an industrious person. You want to be connected and joined. If you're pursuing a romantic relationship, you want to make sure that person is an industrious person. So what do I mean by that? So a lazy person is going to frustrate you to no end when it's come times to pay the bills, to earn an income, clean your house, raise your kids. You do not want to be connected and married to a person who's lazy. You want someone who's going to be a weight that you kind of have to drag along, rather than an additional engine to propel you forward. Right? Does that make sense? So, notice that I said industrious. So they're hardworking. That does not mean that they're rich. So I'm not saying you got to be rich before you start dating, right? So if that was the case, then I would probably just retire to a monastery, right? You do not have to be rich, but if you want to be married, being employed certainly does. It helps, right? So they're industrious, okay? You want to make sure that you marry someone who understands what it means to earn a paycheck, to provide, to care, and to serve, okay? So secondly, you want to find an industrious person, and secondly, you are going to find workers working. Does that make sense? Right? You're going to find, so he realized if I'm going to find this person, I'm going to find a worker working, right? So once again, I'm not necessarily bashing a social scene here, but I am saying, so if you are saying, hey, I need to go to the right place, I'm looking for the right person here. If you want to find someone who is, they're involved, they're serving, if you want to find someone like that, then they're probably not just like talking about it. They're probably doing some of this stuff. Right? So I'm encouraged, even though I was like, there was a moment this week where I was like, a ton of the people in this class are helping with the D now, right? I was like, I don't know if anybody will be here. But there's a ton of, you want to find people. So the people, there's so many who've said, I'll help with a small group with D now, right? So they aren't waiting until they're married to begin faithful service to the church and to the community, right? They're not waiting. So that was one of the, so often we're going to be tempted and prone to say, like, man, my true service to God is going to begin like once I get married. So once I get married and kind of get the ball rolling, then like that's when I'll really plug in and then when I'll serve. So you need to go to the proverbial well, right? Go where you will find people working hard at things that matter, okay? Number 3, surrender the search. Surrender the search. In verses 11 and 12, the servant. So he said, he made the camels kneel down beside the city, outside the city by the well of water at the time of evening, the time when women go out to draw water. And he said, O Lord God of my master Abraham, please grant me success today and show steadfast love to my master Abraham. Okay? So we talked about this at length 2 weeks ago, but what are we doing? We want, from the get-go, we want to actively involve God in the process. We want to pray. We want to ask for wisdom. We want to ask for discernment, right? As we evaluate, as we look at a person's life and say, is this a person that I want to link up with, right? So the funny thing, once again, I've said this I feel like a million times, but we're foolish if we think that God doesn't know anyway, right? So why would we not involve him earlier? Why would we not actively say, Lord, I want you to be in on this process. Help me. Give me discernment. Help me do what is wise, okay? So we want his guidance, his wisdom, and his blessing. So we want to surrender the search early on to him, okay? So this servant, before he meets anyone, he says, Lord, please help me, okay? All right. So surrender the search. Number 4, in verse 14. Look at Genesis 24, verse 14. Number 4. What does he do next? He looks for a gracious person. Okay? He looks for a gracious person. Okay? So in verse 14 it says, let the young woman to whom I shall say, please let down your jar that I may drink. And who shall say, drink, and I will water your camels. Let her be the one whom you have appointed for your servant Isaac. By this I shall know that you have shown steadfast love to my master. Okay? He's looking for a gracious person. Okay? So I know some of you may be thinking, right, finally, like something I can get behind. I can get on board with this. I'm going to walk into a coffee shop or a restaurant and be like, Lord, let the person who sits at the table next to me, let them be the one. Right? You could do that. Please let me know how that goes. And if that works, that's great. What a cool story to tell your grandkids. But I'm going to go out on a limb and say that's probably not the most effective way, probably a great way to freak them out. And they're going to be like, actually, I'll have mine to go, right? So that's not what he's saying, right? So he's that's not what he wants us to see. But the thing that I think that's kind of zooming in on here is that not only is this person hardworking, right? So he's going to the place where, like, I know people are going to be working hard here, but the servant wants to say, okay, is this person a gracious person? Is this a gracious person? Okay, does her hospitality extend merely beyond answering his request for a drink? Right? So he's going to say, notice here he says, so please let down your water, please let down your jar that I may drink. Okay? So this would have been a common thing. Say, hey, you're here to gather water. Can you give me a drink of water? Okay? That would not have been a very uncommon thing to happen. But, okay, and who shall say, we're going to respond, and she's saying, hey, you go ahead and you drink some water, and then let me water all these camels, right? So I know that we don't interact with camels on a daily basis, or maybe you do. I don't think you do. But what's something that you know about camels? They drink a ton of water, right? So this is not some sort of like, hey, yeah, have have a glass of water. And some crackers too, right? No, she's saying, okay, no. Hey, let me give you a drink of water, and let me water these camels, these 10 camels that you have, right? Okay? Let me lower this jar down in this well enough to water 10 camels, right? That's a big chore, okay? So he is looking for someone who is extravagantly hospitable, even to a stranger. Right? He's looking for someone who's going to be gracious. How many times I feel so, man, one of the issues that we face when we get somebody in our lives and they're smooth and winning and they're attractive, anything they do seems like they're like a Nobel Prize winner. You know, they're like, he's nice and he opened the door for me. It's like, that's great. That's a kind gesture, but that's not really that's kind of a common thing, you know. The same thing could happen at any department store you go into, you know. So he's not looking for just sort of like typical courtesy. He's looking for someone who's going to be extravagantly gracious. So one thing we need to kind of check ourselves, and we need to kind of reorient ourselves to understand that, man, kindness and graciousness are very attractive traits, right? And if that's not a factor in your decision making, man, we need to readjust our sights a little bit, right? Is this person kind? Are they gracious? You know, in 1 Peter 3, verse 3 and 4, it says, "Do not let your adorning be external." Peter's talking to women, in particular women in this church. He says, "Do not your adorning be external, the braiding of hair and the putting on of gold, jewelry, or the clothing you wear, but let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious." Right? Peter is not telling women, he's not saying, hey, don't get dressed up. You know, you're missing the point. He's not saying that. He's saying, hey, man, your character will take you further than your cosmetics will. Right? Once again, and the same thing is true of you. So in Proverbs 19:22, it says, "What is desirable in a man is his kindness." Right? So I wonder what difference it would make if we were determined to have our chief distinctive not be our job or the fact that we work out 3 times a week or the fact that we're witty and fun or something like that. What if our desire would be that we would be known by a gracious and kind attitude towards one another? A gracious and kind attitude that shows itself in extravagant hospitality, extravagant acts of kindness and graciousness, right? So the servant is not, he's saying, I'm going to go to a place where people are working hard, and I'm going to find someone who does something extravagant, right? Those are the kind of people that we need to say, hey, no, this person, there's something special about them, okay? So he's looking for a gracious person. Next up, watch and learn. Watch and learn. So, he goes, right? He goes, he finds this young woman, and he asks of her, right? And it happens, right? He says, hey, can I have a drink? And she says, yes, drink, and let me water your camels as well, okay? So this man, what does he do next? He says, in verse 21, it says, the man gazed at her in silence to learn whether the Lord had prospered his journey or not. So what does he do? He watches, okay? It's one thing to hear what someone has to say. It's another thing entirely to watch how they live, right? The servant watches Rebekah serve him when he has nothing to offer in return. okay? He watches Rebekah help an aging man and water these camels. Why does she do that? He's got nothing to offer her, but she does so because she's a woman of character. So he watches, he looks, he examines, he's discerning, right? So this is one area where it's, I don't know, I think we're often so tempted to just we're tempted to pull the trigger. We're like, hey, they're nice, we should get married, right? Where we would benefit so much by just saying, okay, I'm going to watch you for a little while, okay? Notice I said watch, not stalk, but I'm going to watch you. What is distinctive about you? What is it that, we've said this in previous weeks, but what do you do? How do you serve people who can't do anything for you? Are they, another great indicator is, are you ever in a situation where you could serve someone? Are you ever, are they, if a person you're interested in, what fruit in their lives says, I am this kind of person. I'm this kind of person who's gracious, who spends it all for the kingdom, right? So that's another, let's once again, we talked about this whole framework. What's the purpose of this thing? Evaluating. We're evaluating, I think so often it's like, well, we might interact with someone who say, well, I'm not really involved with anything, but I'm going to be. So we work with a lot of, at my job, we work with a lot of college students, and a lot of, one thing that we hear a lot of is, as we're interviewing, we'll hear people say, hey, we'll ask them, hey, what church do you go to? Do you go to church somewhere? And they say, well, I do. I'm still a member at my home church, which is 4 hours away from where I go to school. But I haven't really found a church yet, in my new community, where I go to school. I'm like, okay, well, how long have you been at your school? I'm a senior. It's like, oh, so you've been there for 4 years? It's like, yeah, I've been there 4 years still, and found a place where I can really jump in, and it's like, eesh, right? That should be red, that's a red flag for us, right? Because if we want to find someone and say, hey, is this person making changes because they're interacting with us, or are they making changes, or is this just a part of who they are, right? You don't want to find someone who hasn't gone to church in 6 years. They meet you and then they start coming to church sporadically, right? Man, that's good. You should encourage them. Hey, please come, right? Please come. I want you to be involved in this thing. But that should be, man, we need to be watchful and learn and say, okay, hey, I noticed that, man, do you serve in any way? Are you involved in cultivating people's lives and serving and pouring yourself out? Ben tells an incredibly poignant story about when he was in college. There was a small, a campus ministry where he was involved, and there was a guy that he knew, and he was persistently asking out a young lady who was a part of that campus ministry, and just constantly hey, let's go out. Can I take you to dinner? Let's go out. And just was just really badgering, hey, please, come on, let's go out. Let's go out, right? And so Ben, he was watching this scenario unfold, and she was like, hey, thank you for this invitation, but no. So she respectfully just declines, right? And so Ben approached her and he said, "So I noticed that I feel like a lot of people would just be like, oh, okay, fine, I'll do it, whatever. I noticed that you were really confident and persistent. No, I'm not gonna go out with this guy. I'm not gonna go out with you, right?" He said, "So what's your reasoning? What's your thought process behind that?" And she's like, "Hey, the community, our small little community of faith here at this big school, there's not very many people, right? in our campus ministry, there's not very many people, right? There's not very many opportunities to serve, right? And in 3 years of being at this university, I've never seen this guy be involved in any of them. I've never seen that person be involved in any of these opportunities to serve, any sort of opportunity to serve in the church. None of this stuff. So like, I haven't, this is a small enough school where it's like, I know what the opportunities to do this, and I've never seen this person be involved in any of these things, right? Man, that's a simple and yet profound understanding of like, hey, this anybody can be charming for 2 hours on a date, right? That's relatively easy, okay? So this young lady she had already been like, I am resolved. I'm not even going to give this guy a shot because, man, we've been here for 3 years and I've never seen this person serve. I've never seen this person, they're not involved in any church context, any of these communities or any of these avenues to serve. Like, so I'm not gonna. Why would I waste my time, right? Man, that was convicting to me. So what was she doing? She was watching and she was learning. She wasn't a jerk. She wasn't say like, you're a waste of time. She was saying, hey, man, thank you for your interest. I'm going to respectfully decline, right? Because I have not seen you pour yourself out in any way, right? You need to watch and learn, okay? 6, worship worthy. Is this person worship worthy, okay? So the servant is watching Rebekah react to these unexpected situations with the utmost just poise and grace. When he engages her in some discussion, he finds out that not only is she hospitable, but she's actually of the family of Abraham. She's a member of the family of God, and she exhibits the character of a child of God, right? And so when he sees this, he does the most natural thing possible. He worships. In verse 27, he says, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his steadfast love and his faithfulness toward my master. As for me, the Lord has led me in the way to the house of my master's kinsman." You want to pursue and be united to someone who provokes you to worship God. Someone who, when you're around them, you're like, man, God is so kind. Me being around you points me to the goodness of Jesus and the kindness of God who has done such good things to me, right? I think if we're honest, a lot of the times, if I think about, maybe you think about past relationships or whatever, most of the time, if we're looking at someone, our gaze is brought down, not up, right? Right? We're just sort of our life kind of revolves around this person, and it doesn't say, man, this person is pointing me to Jesus, pointing me to Christ, and saying, man, how good is God, right? So you need to pursue someone who makes you worship God, okay? I hope that you don't spend all your time trying to find someone you deserve. Does that make sense? I hope that you would give God the glory for someone in your life that you realize you don't deserve, right? Because if you spend all your time saying like, I know I deserve this. I'm not saying you need to find someone who makes you feel bad. I'm not saying that. But I am saying, hey, I don't know how many times I look at my wife and I think, man, I don't deserve you, right? I don't deserve you. And what does that make me do? Ultimately, that rolls up into praise to the Lord to say, man, God, you're so good. You're so kind to bring this person into my life, right? We need to pursue people who make us worship, okay? Number 7, we need to search for someone who is ready to live by faith, okay? So Rebekah, so they find out there is a family connection. They find out that, she's a person of character, and she's gracious and kind. So what happens? What happens next? So she invites him. She says, hey, come back to my family's home, and you can stay. You can stay. We'll take care of you. We'll take care of your livestock. And so he brings her home, and to meet her relatives. And later in Genesis, if you'll remember, she meets, I forget it, his name escapes me, but she meets her brother, right? And turns out he's a pretty shady guy, right? So ends up cheating and saying, cheating his relatives, and he's not a person of integrity. So he sees an opportunity to kind of exploit this servant a little bit. He says, "Why don't you stay around? Come on, you obviously maybe you have a master who's wealthy. Let's kind of stick around." But the servant is saying, "No, I'm going to go back, right? I want to go back. Okay, will you come with me, right? I don't want to stay here. I want to go back to my master Abraham, and I want to leave promptly." So her brother, he defers to Rebekah for this decision. He asked, "Will you go? Will you go with this guy?" And her response is beautiful, short and sweet. She says, "I'll go. I'll go." Okay? So listen, by our standards, that's pretty nuts, right? Never met this guy. Someone's like, "Hey, man, the master that I serve, he has a son, and man, will you come and marry this guy?" Right? So this is not necessarily prescriptive for us, right? I'm not saying like find a total stranger who's like, "You know what? I've got a grandson, and they're great. You want to come marry him?" Right? So that's not saying that, right? But what is she? What? It's funny how I feel like we're pointed in this direction, and we're saying so. These are some pretty crazy circumstances, but what is it communicating about Rebekah? So she knows, man. So this Abraham, man. So he's following God. He's gone out from us, and he's following God, and he's pursuing this promise. And she says, I want to go be a part of that, right? I want to go be a part of that. She saw God at work. She saw God at work, and she said, "I'll go. I'll go. I'll be a part of this thing." Okay? So if you have to, I feel like in our context, right, we can wait and wait and wait. And so if you have to wait until you're 40, then wait. Wait until you're 50, then you wait. Wait until you're 60, then wait. But what she is doing, she's saying, "Hey, I'm going to wait until I find someone who is walking by faith, and then I'm going to say, I'll go with them. I'll go with you." Right? So listen to this. It's better to get the ideal person with bad timing than it is to get married with your ideal timing to the wrong person. I'll say that again. It's better to get the ideal person with bad timing than to get married at your ideal timing to the wrong person. Okay? She knew she was taking a step of faith. She's saying, "Hey, God is at work in the life of this family, and I'm going to go. I'm going to go." Okay? All right. Number 8. Strive for the blessing of the family. One more tip that kind of unfolds in verse 60 and 61 of chapter 24. It says, "And they blessed Rebekah and said to her, 'Our sister, may you become thousands of 10,000s, and may your offspring possess the gates of those who hate him.' So they give her a blessing. Then Rebekah and her young women arose and rode on the camels and followed the man. Thus the servant took Rebekah and went his way." So, strive for the blessing of the family. Okay? This can be a difficult topic, right? This is tough, right? Because we have to consider, as we look into this, we're living in a broken world with broken relationships and broken families, all of these things. So, man, you have to understand that, hey, someone's family context might not be ideal. There might be a lot of baggage. There might be a lot of hurt and a lot of damage that one or both people might be dealing with. But it's important that you strive for the blessing of this family, because like it or not, what's going to happen, if as you evaluate this person, as you say, hey, and maybe you think, I think they're walking by faith. They're moving towards Christ. I want to align with them. I want to be united to them, right? What's going to happen is that ultimately, you're becoming a part of each other's families. That's going to happen. And if one of you is saying, like, I don't want anything to do with your family, right? That's going to be tough. That's going to be tough. When you, especially down the road, as you maybe introduce, time together and you introduce kids into the scenario, things like this, you need to strive for the blessing of the family, okay? So it's important. So notice that I said blessing. So this is something that I've had conversations with several folks about. Like, do I need, say if I'm dating someone, do I need to like ask permission? Do I need to someone need to ask my parents or something like that? And I would say not like, this once again, this is an area that requires some wisdom, right? But what I would encourage is not necessarily, because there may be situations where, man, if you're a person of faith, maybe your parents do not believe. Maybe they don't know the Lord. Maybe they're like, man, this does not make sense to me, right? And it's not going to make sense because they don't know the Lord, right? So what I would encourage is you are making this thing transparent, and you're saying, hey, what I'm doing here is I'm not saying like, I got to have your, permission necessarily to date your daughter or whatever the case may be, But I am saying, hey, it's going to benefit you to pursue the blessing, and say, hey, this is where I am. I'm not in a position where I am trying to just kind of like date frivolously here. And so I want to pursue, say, hey, I want to pursue a blessing. I want you to bless this thing and say, this is who I am. This is what my intentions are. This is what I want to do. So I'm asking for your blessing for this. Okay, that is going to tremendously, I think, as a dad to a daughter, like that puts me on a whole different plane. And I'm saying, okay, all right, thank you for some transparency here, right? So we want to pursue the blessing of the family. So as we kind of wrap this story up, in Ephesians 5, we learn that God ordained the marriage of a man and a woman to serve as a living picture to Christ in the church. So what is marriage? Marriage is just a picture, right, of Christ uniting with his people. The story of Isaac and Rebekah is showing us this very thing, okay, from Genesis 24. So what do we see? The father sends a servant to find a chosen bride. And when the servant locates her, he tells her of all the riches of the father have been given to the son. She's invited to make a decision. Will you take a journey by faith, trusting that the son will take you to be in his father's house forever? Okay? Isn't that our story too? Right? As God has pursued us. So we see, once again, we go back to the beginning, we talk about how principles help our kind of guide shape our lives and our thoughts, but pictures can help our imagination as we say, man, what does this look like, okay? So as we've seen this in Isaac and Rebekah, and we see it ultimately in the person and work of Jesus Christ. So as we close, I wanted to just kind of there are 4 things that I wanted to just quickly cover, because ultimately there's a time when you have to ask yourself the question of how do you know, right? So how do you know that you know? As you pursue someone, say, hey, they're a person, we have chemistry, they're a person of character, we're going in the same direction, so how do you know when you know, okay? And that's one thing that I feel like our culture, man, it's like we're like, well, we feel like we need to account for every aspect, or every like we need to know everything there is to know about this person before we, sign on the proverbial line. It's like, well, I'm not going to say I'm going to marry you until I know this, and this. Do you snore when you sleep? Right? So we feel like we need to be prepared for every contingency. When what that really is, man, that's antithetical to the gospel, isn't it? Right? I'm in it as long as I know everything about you and it doesn't make me mad. So if something about you, if I find something out about you that annoys me, then I'm out, right? Isn't that the opposite of what the gospel teaches? God says, no, I know everything about you, and I'm still choosing to follow you, right? Or still choosing to save you, right? So how do you know when you know? So we know our culture is saying like, well, you gotta check off all these boxes before you do this, right? And a lot of times that means you got to live together for a little bit. You need to do all this stuff to kind of make sure that's how you know. That's how you know. Okay, so I think a lot of people would just say, well, you just know. When you know, you know. And that might kind of be true in a sense, but that's not super helpful, is it? You just know, man. What can I say? You just know, right? So I want to provide something that's a little bit more clear and tactile for us to consider. So one of the things that, how do you know, is that one, you're going to have a strong sense of commitment, okay? You need to observe in your relationship a strong resolve to stay together even when things are hard. So when things get tough, are you in a position, have you ever encountered in your relationship a time where you're like, man, this is hard. This is a tough season. You know, it's going to be important for you to go through some storms together, okay? So a great question to ask yourselves is simply this. Do you want to work through problems with this person? Okay? Notice I said the question is not, are you able to work through problems, but do you want to work through problems with this person? Okay? You can probably grit your teeth and make it through some pretty tough stuff, but my guess is that you don't want to do that for 30 years. Because there are people who do that. And just, what a miserable way to live. Just being like, ugh, you don't want that. Okay? You need to find someone who says, no, I want to work through problems. So true and lasting love says, I am staying. We see this in wedding vows, don't we? For better, for worse. Okay? Committed love is saying, no, I'm staying. So there's a strong sense of commitment. So how do you know you have a strong sense of commitment? Is that commitment overcomes hardship. When things get tough with this person, they're not going to bounce. Okay? All right? That's why it's important for us to have deep and sometimes difficult conversations, right? To get a good understanding of a person's character and integrity, you need to evaluate long enough to see how this relationship survives when there's drama and there's hardship, right? Strong sense of commitment, okay? Step 1. 2, growing skill of communication. You want to be able to say, hey, as we are, the more time we spend together, the more I feel like it's easier to communicate with you, right? I feel like sometimes it's like, well, we're spending the more time we spend together, I feel like I feel like I'm more confused as to who you are. I feel like I don't know how you communicate. I feel like I don't understand you, right? So you both need to develop the ability to communicate clearly and graciously towards each other. So a great question for this. Good self-diagnosis here. Can you disagree? Can you disagree in a way that promotes unity rather than disunity? Okay? Can you disagree in a fair and kind way? Proverbs 12:18 says, there is one whose rash words are like sword thrusts, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. So when you disagree, do your words become weapons? Do you go into attack mode? Right? If you're with someone and you notice that every time you get in an argument, or maybe you just bring out the guns and blast them. Right? Are you willing to wound the other person so you can win an argument? Right? Or even when your feelings are hurt, are you able to speak words to each other that are wise and bring healing and health to your relationship? Right? That's going to be important to know, y'all. If there's someone in your life that's like, man, every time we get in an argument, they just like right to the kidneys, Man, that is a person like, hey, this is a red flag. This is not a helpful place for us to be, okay? If you can communicate well with each other, you can navigate through a lot of issues quickly. But if every disagreement dissolves into arguments and yelling, you need to reconsider some things, Make sense? So, growing skills of communication. Number 3, you need to survive a moment of confession. So how do you know when you know? You survive a moment of confession. So just a heads up, y'all, this is tough. This is a difficult conversation, maybe the most difficult conversation of your life. To say to a person that you think you could love, say, hey, for some, this might involve telling, being clear and upfront and saying, hey, some things happened to me. I've endured some abuse. Some of these things someone has sinned against me. Okay? And how that is going to affect the way that you view life. Okay? For all of us, so that may be true for some of us, but for all of us, it's going to involve confessing sin. Confessing sin and saying, hey, man, I've committed a sin against God, or I've committed a sin against another person. Right? You have got to be able to share these things with each other. It's got to happen. Okay? This is not necessarily a first date conversation, but it is something that must be shared before you commit to marriage. So when you share an intimate and deeply personal confession with someone, it can be a powerful healing moment, and it can also open the doors for restoration. But it's going to take a lot of transparency. It's going to take, hey, for some it may involve, hey, this is true about me. And the choice is yours. Right? That's tough. Like I said, this is not an easy conversation to have, but it's a crucial conversation to have. So can you survive a moment of confession? If this relationship is going to work, because that's going to come up. Some of this stuff's going to come up. You can't just sit on this stuff forever. It's going to come up. So can a person handle that? Can a person look at you and say, hey, thank you for telling me that. Thank you for confessing that to me. I still love you. Still desire you. I forgive you. Right? And that, how you know you and you know? When you can survive a moment of confession and say, yeah, man, how good is God that he loves us, right? Okay. Last of all, support of your community, okay? How do you know you know? Looked at sense of commitment, growing skill in communication, surviving a moment of confession, and then the support of your family of faith, right? Once again, if you are involved in church, if you're active in a C group or something like that, and then no one knows that you're dating somebody, like that's not good, right? I've been in context before where someone I didn't even know was dating were like, "Hey, I got engaged last week." And you're like, "Oh, super!" I didn't know that you were dating. You haven't talked. Okay, that's weird, right? That's kind of that's odd, right? So you need to have people in your life, people in your and a beautiful place for this. And I think the place this is intended to be is the context of your community of faith, of this church, to say, hey, I'm dating this someone. I've invited God in on the process, and I'm praying and asking God for discernment. And then I want to invite you in on the process. I want you, man. We're close. There's people in my life that I have put in place to say, hey, I want you to speak the truth to me. I want you to either disciple or walk alongside me in this thing. And if those people are like, man, this is bad news. You should not do this. This is not good. You got to listen to them. You need to listen to them, right? That's tough because it is, man, we talked about this, but we let the cute factor put the blinders on us and things like this, and we will let ourselves go forward in isolation. We'll let ourselves make really hasty, bad decisions. So we need to say, I'm walking in the light. I'm not trying to do any of this in obscurity, or ambiguity. I'm saying, hey, I'm inviting you in on this process. What do you think? Just asking someone in your life, what do you think about this? We're pursuing each other, and what do you think? You know, this is how I'm feeling. This is how I'm thinking. What do you think about that? You know, and you need to find someone who was going to be courageous enough to say, like, that's not good. You know, it's going to be super easy because a row we can take with this is saying, like, you know, so-and-so is kind of a yes man. You know, you can be like, well, you know, we're going to move in together just to kind of help save on rent, and, you know, it'll be fine. They're going to be like, yeah, makes good economic sense. You know, you want to find someone who's going to be like, hey, I don't think that's a good idea. I think it's going to be really tough to maintain purity. It's going to be really tough to do that, to make that decision if you're doing this thing. You know, someone's going to say no to you, right? Because it's going to be super easy for us. We want to say, I'm just going to check the box here and just be like, I told somebody, but it's like, no, find somebody who's going to care for your soul, walk alongside you well, and who's going to be like, who you have given the green light to be like, hey, shout me down on this, okay? Does that make sense? This is one of the biggest decisions of your life. So you don't need to make it in isolation, right? Invite people on the process. Invite others in.